everybody's doing some form of consumptive pricing. And what's the point of consumptive pricing? You sing for your supper, right, Chandrika? We have to make sure that the customer is successful, that they are not only implemented well, that they are adopting the solution. And ultimately, if they adopt the solution effectively, they're getting value realization from it. And if we do those things well, what happens? We earn the authority for the next deal and the bigger deal, right? And in fact, you see it at LaunchDarkly, you see it at a lot of organizations. There's very much a land and expand motion. Most of those first deals we do at launch, or even any of my past lives, they weren't the multi-million-dollar all-you-can-eat enterprise license deal. It happens once in a while. It's pretty cool when that happens. But actually, you have risk if you do too big of a deal too early that you oversell the customer and they ultimately churn later as well. So what I've observed is that land and expand motion is really the crux of success in a lot of these B2B SaaS organizations.
Welcome to another episode of Hold the Churn, the show where we go behind the scenes with the sharpest minds in revenue to decode what's changing, what's timeless, and what's actually driving growth in 2025 and beyond. I'm Chandrika, co-founder, CEO of Quibbly AI, the most powerful customer intelligence platform for post-sales teams. Our AI agents bring together internal data and market signals to help post-sales teams identify and take actions to expand and retain existing customers. Today, we're joined by Karan Singh, the SVP of GTM Strategy and Operations at LaunchDarkly. Karan thinks about and leads the entire revenue lifecycle from sales productivity to customer success and has guided companies through major growth phases, including IPOs. What makes his perspective especially unique is that he operates right at the intersection of data, strategy, and execution. Karan's been outspoken on how AI is reshaping sales, but also reminds us that the human connection is still at the heart of revenue. So, Karan, with all of that, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And you're right, the human connection's never going away. I love talking about that, but good to be on.
Yes, let's talk about it more in a little bit, but let's get us started with your story, Karan. Can you walk us through what your journey to becoming the Senior Vice President of Go-to-Market Strategy and Operations at LaunchDarkly has been like?
Yeah, for sure. I like to tell people I got hit with the lucky stick a little bit during my career. It's been a while now, but Chandrika, I started really as a rev operations individual. Back before it was called revenue operations, it was more sales operations in a perpetual software cybersecurity company called ArcSight. So that may age me a little bit, but you can get a little bit of context as to how long ago that was. And I joined the organization after trying my own little entrepreneurial stint prior, similar to how you're a CEO of a compelling organization. I tried to do the same and quickly realized that if you build a product and you don't know how to sell it, which I didn't back then, it's a hobby, not a business. And so I came back after an entrepreneurial stint and said, hey, I need to learn how to figure out this whole revenue thing. And I was pretty good operationally already and thought I'd try out revenue operations in more depth. And that's where my foray into ArcSight started. And that was one of probably the more meaningful parts of my career was the beginning, because once I joined ArcSight, within about a couple of years, it went public. And back then you could go public at 100 million ARR. Now it's like 700 million. So it's a bit of a difference. But about a year after we went public, we were acquired by Hewlett Packard for X revenue multiples, which was kind of crazy back then. And HP had this thing, it was called the HP way, where within 30 days, 50 days, they would take every company they acquired off of their proprietary tools and process areas and whatnot and move them onto whatever HP did. ArcSight was the first company ever in the history of Hewlett Packard where they didn't do that, because they saw what we had built from the ops side and realized how mission critical it was. They knew that we would completely seize up as an organization if we moved off of our processes and our systems and our just everything. And so they didn't do it with us. In fact, we ushered them towards a decision to move off of their instance of Siebel, which was like old school on-premise CRM, over to what was then the biggest purchase of Salesforce.com in the history of the Valley. I think it was $120 million subscription license per year that HP did based on what they saw from ArcSight. So I bring that up to say, like, that's where I was baptized in all things revenue and operations. Is I started off working at this little startup, and that grew, became public, and quickly whatever I'd built there applied to also one of the biggest companies in tech in the Valley. And I realized, man, I think what I'm doing is scalable, it's repeatable. It's something I want to build a career in. And that's exactly what I've done since. After that, went over to Cloudera. I was the first operator there and took that company from pre IPO, really 20, $30 million of ARR all the way to just under $1 billion of public event as well. And then did it again at a vertical SaaS company, Procore, iconic back, again, joined around 100 and left right around $1 billion as well. And so had the chance to do it a few times before. And then I took a little foray into venture capital for a couple of years as well and learned how investors think about all things revenue and really more importantly, how they think about valuing companies and how companies sort of go from inception all the way to an event, whatever that liquidity event may be, some sort of outcome. And I got to see it from both sides, Chandrika, and then I've been able to take all those great learnings and, of course, apply it here at LaunchDarkly, where I've been for the last couple of years too. So I get the privilege of doing this a few times and get to apply those learnings as well. And that's a little bit of my career in a nutshell. And I love it. It's my passion area, and I'm blessed to be able to do that as a gig and get paid for it.
What an arc, Karan. There's so many things I want to dig into.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the HP days. What do
Yeah.
you think the team saw in terms of the processes and the operations, the way you all were doing it, to let you sort of continue steering the ship in that direction? And how have you been able to sort of, take that and apply it everywhere else that you've gone?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, one of the things I tell my operations teams is like, look, we're like any other product organization in some ways, except our customer is a seller or really any of the revenue team members. Can we also be customer centric by definition? So during ArcSight days, pre-acquisition from HP, when we were building out the foundation, the infrastructure, the processes, all that good stuff, it always started with like, let's do the side by side with the seller, actually understand what their wants, needs, and expectations are, what processes actually work for them, not just conceptually or theoretically on some page that we documented with enablement, but what's actually happening in practice. Tweak, tune, and tailor ourselves to reflect that and canonize that, and then build all the systems and all the handoffs and all the good stuff accordingly. Nowadays, we call it customer journey mapping, right? We do it in a more intentional fashion and we have all this baked out. But even customer journey mapping is not just about our customer, but also how we sell to the customer. So we were doing it almost accidentally in ArcSight days, Chandrika, and then reflecting all our systems and tools accordingly. And I think that's what HP saw was that, man, this is mission critical. Heck, if what we had built did not matter and wouldn't actually make a difference in how our sellers executed, they would have probably taken us up all of our stuff. But it did matter. And it was because we started with the right first principles thinking and we started with the right customer mindset, both for the seller as well as our ultimate customer. And yeah, that's translated to every stop and stint I've been a part of, whether it was Cloudera, whether it was Procore, now at LaunchDarkly. Even at LaunchDarkly, when I first came here, the very first thing I did was a customer journey mapping exercise where I said, what are my various phases and stages of the customer journey? What is it that the customer objective? What is the customer's objective? And then how do we actually solve for that? What are the milestones, the deliverables, the decision points, the assets, the technology, all the things we need, and then use it to build the foundation for revenue operations.
Yeah. Your role is so unique because you think about like the entire customer journey end to end. And as you said, like your customers are revenue leaders. So on one end, you think about sales efficiency, and on the other end, you're thinking about customer retention. How do you deliver value to customers? How do you showcase that value? How do you think about the relationship between those two? Is there one? And if there is, like, where do those two things being seller efficiency and delivering customer value, intersect?
I mean, to be honest, in this new world order we're in, nobody sells by the seat anymore, right? Everybody's doing some form of consumptive pricing. And what's the point of consumptive pricing? You sing for your supper, right, Chandrika? We have to make sure that the customer is successful, that they're not only implemented well, that they are adopting the solution. And ultimately, if they adopt the solution effectively, they're getting value realization from it. And if we do those things well, what happens? We earn the authority for the next deal and the bigger deal, right? And in fact, you see it at LaunchDarkly, you see it at a lot of organizations. There's very much a land and expand motion. Most of those first deals we do at launch, or even any of my past lives, they weren't the multi-million dollar all you can eat enterprise license deal. It happens once in a while. It's pretty cool when that happens. But actually, you have risk if you do too big of a deal too early that you oversell the customer and they ultimately churn later as well. So what I've observed is that that land and expand motion is really the crux of success in a lot of these B2B SaaS organizations. So yeah, the expectation is for the seller to go in and really be customer centric, to be value centric, to be solution centric, really, and help guide the customer on what that looks like. Hey, in the beginning, this is what your land should look like. This is what most customers do with us. They start with X, and then we earn the authority for Y, whether it's a cross sell or an upsell, and then to Z, and eventually that enterprise license agreement. So the two things are deeply connected because good sellers, they make their money not off of the land, but off of that multi-million dollar expand in year two of the relationship with the customer. In year three, and we espouse a lot of that here at LaunchDarkly too, is that, look, you need to own your territory for 2, 3, and 4 years, and your great returns come in year 2 and 3. Year 1, you're gonna probably hit quota. You're probably gonna build for the future, but it has to be about the long term as well and the customer success. So I always thought of those two as very deeply connected. And I would just also say to you is that whether you're generating new subscription dollars or if you're retaining existing subscription dollars, Chandrika, they're all subscription dollars. They all matter the exact same amount. And our sellers should be thinking the same.
I mean, in some ways, acquiring new customers is a lot more expensive than
Far more.
keeping, existing customers happy, continuing to deliver value. So yeah, like they're all subscription dollars. And I'm seeing the organizations that I've been speaking to investing a lot more in actually figuring out how to enable their post-sales teams to really have the right resources to expand these customers that they have landed and make sure that they're ahead of any kind of churn risks if they can spot them early. How do you all think about, talked about the land and expand strategy at launch Darkly? How do you enable the teams to understand which customers are ripe for expansion, which customers could be at risk for churn eventually whenever the renewal is coming up? How do you think about those things?
Yeah, it's a good question. The reality is that there's no one panacea. There's not this, there's been I feel like I've seen and heard this for the last decade, really, of customer 360 or this like perfect model that tells you everything you need to know about the customer. So therefore, and thusly, you will know your next best offer and your next best action and all those things. It just doesn't exist. Now, what does exist is triangulation, is a multi-step, multi-modal process. So said differently, your sellers do. They need to have the conversation with the customer and help them understand the mutual success plan after they close a deal and set the expectation. Your CSMs should have this no customer left behind mentality, meaning they should be reaching out to their customers not just 30 days before the renewal, but throughout the motion and with real value add resourcing. You should have a business value team going in and doing BVRs, meaning almost reviews of, hey, here's what we said would be the impact if you bought LaunchDarkly, and we could prove it. Here's how much ROI you got as a result. And you should be using technology as a force multiplier. You should be looking at product telemetry, and you should be looking at usage and utilization stats and all those beautiful things that we now have access to that frankly we didn't used to, especially when we were on-prem for that matter. And bring it all together and then use that to determine, hey, what does the customer need next? How do we continue to evolve and grow that relationship with them? So it's not one thing, it's all the things together that ultimately lead to the right result. A little side story on this that I'll tell you that kind of cements this. So at Cloudera, we had customer telemetry, a bunch of information. We had we're a data science company essentially, right? We were Snowflake and Databricks before Snowflake and Databricks. So we had our own data warehouse. And this used to happen from time to time where we'd see these massive spikes in usage from our customers. We're like, awesome. time to expand. What was actually happening was they were spiking in usage because they were actually migrating off of Cloudera to another solution. So they had to do a bunch of work in the last minute in order to go do that. So we had these false sort of flags that were happening frequently as well. The only way we figured that out, Chandrika, was because we didn't just become slavish to the data, but because we had cadences and motions where we engaged with the customers and learned from them and listened to them and mapped it with the data to say, hey, what's actually happening in practice? And then fed that back to the organization. And that always stuck with me. It's like, it can't just be the data. It has to be all of it together. Otherwise, you get those false positives. And that can be really difficult for an organization to combat without having that right ritual cadence engagement model in place, if that makes sense.
Love that. A few years ago, it was like the cool thing to constantly talk about how data driven, everybody is as an organization. And I think there's been a much needed shift in terms of like, what does being data driven really mean? Are you, as you said, to your point, like, are you being slaves to the data and just like trusting it blindly? Or are you really thinking about how are you going to be data informed, but really use that data to understand what's broadly happening with the customers? Another false positive that we've seen with a lot of like AI companies is they measure the number of workflows often that a customer is running. And sometimes you will see spikes in a certain workflow, not because they're using a lot more of it, because it didn't work the first time, the second time, the third time around. And so the customer is having to do it over and over again. And so to your point, like it's really critical to understand that in the context of everything else that's happening and not lose the human touch. Now, in
Absolutely.
prep for this, Karan, I listened to some of the other podcasts you've been on recently, and it ties back to the previous question that you were just responding to. Now, you've talked about building a shared source of truth in revenue operations. How does that fit in practice, and how have you done that at LaunchDarkly? What does that mean tactically for you all?
Yeah. When we say shared source of truth, you mean that like true, like foundational data model that ultimately informs all the decision making? Is that what you're referencing? Man, it is such it's a challenge to get right. And I think some of it has to do with, frankly, what you adopt. In some ways, I get jealous of those operators that are in the like $0 to $20 million ARR journey, right? Because they don't have any spaghetti to unwind, so to speak, with their existing data. They get to build it from scratch. And honestly, that was one of my privileges back in Cloudera days as well, is that I got to sort of start from scratch. I haven't gotten to start from scratch since then. A couple of things that I would espouse. So number one, definitions matter. Do you have proper stewardship? Do you have proper governance? Do you have proper definitions for all the data that you actually care most about? Most companies don't, right? You ask three different people in finance and sales and then in HR what the definition of a new logo is, they'll probably give you three different definitions. In many organizations, it's kind of scary how that's the case. So having somebody be the DRI or the directly responsible individual, the owner that can define sort of what those KPIs are and how we should use them as a business, I think is primary. Then secondary is what's the feedback loop, so to speak, with the organization to understand how the business is looking at the data and what the learnings are from it and what other information they actually need. You can call that stewardship, you can call that governance. Most people call it more like those data stewards. There's folks that should be out there and understanding what data matters, what are we missing, what do we need, and then referring back to that like core definitions library and saying, hey, do we need to add to it as well? So I say that that's the non-sexy stuff, Chandrika. That's the stuff that you just should be building and doing in a consistent fashion. If you can do that well, then you get to do the fun stuff, which is actually build out that data model or build out the rows and tables and all the good stuff that comes with to say, here's the core set of data that actually matters for your organization. Everybody agrees to it. It's sanctioned. And now the easy part is the pretty charts and pictures. If we do a good job with the definitions, with the stewardship, with the governance, and we do a good job of building all of that in our data warehouse or wherever we choose to, and put the right, hey, this is sanctioned on top of the data that we offer. I actually don't mind if the average CSM goes in and builds their own report anymore. And I don't mind if you do the quote unquote bring your own data motion in a meeting because everybody's just singing from the same core data set, so to speak. the funny thing is most organizations think there's this like tool out there that can solve it, or that think that, hey, we bought Snowflake, so now we got all the data in one place, so therefore and thusly we are okay. The reality is it's all the other foundational stuff. If you put the energy behind that, the great thing is then you actually don't get great data, you get great decision support, which is what we're really looking for. Nobody wants to show up and throw up with a bunch of data, Chandrika. What we want to be able to do is make better decisions as leaders. This is what it offers.
Yeah. The foundation across all the systems and all the systems talking about the same customers, whether it's like the unique identifier customer ID or whatever it is, having a universal ID for each customers to like map all of that together. Not just in Snowflake, but what's happening in Salesforce, what's happening
Yeah.
across all the systems to paint that full picture of a customer across the entire process is so critical.
And by the way, I do think it's getting, I wouldn't say easier, but it's getting more accessible with all these AI centric solutions that are out there that can actually make some of those decisions for you, impute some of that, and help put and cobble all those things together. It's really hard to do it with a bunch of humans at the helm. But I could put a 25-person data team together to kind of bring it all together with stewards and governance leaders and this and the other. But we do. We have technology now that can help us there. Now, there will always be some level of oversight, but it's getting easier and better. My question is, do organizations know how important it is? And will they prioritize it the way that it's meant to be prioritized? It is a level one, top of the food chain thing to solve for. And I can tell you this because, again, every single company that I've been a part of so far, I've been privileged, has gone through a public event. And in every single one of those, not having this fixed was so painful late stage before filing the S1 and before getting ready to not having that sanction and source of truth, whether it's customer data, whether it's all the different tools. So earlier you get to it, the more reverence you give to it, all the better.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Our favorite topic, AI, and how we're using AI for automating a lot of the processes that should be automated, but striking that balance with human connection. And to your point, prioritizing it at the top level. How are you all thinking about that at LaunchDarkly in terms of striking the balance between using AI and AI's role in revenue lifecycle broadly and keeping that human touch where it's needed?
Yeah, there's I oversimplify it, but I think there's either co-pilot or autopilot. Those are the two ways to think about AI. And obviously it's probably more complex than that, but for my crayon simple mind that works. And I think for the most part, sales is more co-pilot than autopilot. Now, if you're looking at top of the funnel and somebody comes inbound, can you do an AI chatbot that just runs on their own and is perfectly fine to be autonomous? Sure. We're seeing companies like OneMind out there that actually have an app face to the AI bot that can actually be audible and verbal ready. So all that's possible. Don't get me wrong. There are autopilot use cases. But for the most part, my intention is to do more of a co-pilot motion with a CSM or with an AE, basically give them all the right information, the right context, the right clues, the right messaging, the right next best action, offer, recommendation, and allow the human to lead the charge from there. What you're really doing is mitigating risk there to some degree because nobody's going to go way off the reservation because it's all at their fingertips. And you're increasing the effectiveness of the average seller or CSM or individual contributor. They're all working like your best individual. And I think that's probably the most useful way to think about AI. I also think of AI as a way for us to have a lot of safe at bats, right? I've mentioned in past podcasts this notion of AI role plays and how important they are. Shouldn't we take 100 test and try at bats in terms of how we engage with a customer, doing it with a AI bot instead, who can also objection handle with you? Should we do that a bunch before we go and talk with a customer first? That to me is true enablement. That's practical enablement. Things like that are a great use for AI. And then the only other thing I would say is that one of the more simple and meaningful use cases of AI I think of is something affectionately called this like headless CRM. This notion of there's so much perfunctory clerical activities we all do today within sales, within CS. It's all right, let me fill out my catalyst and update this next step and fill out medpic and all these different things that actually add up. Why? Shouldn't all that be done by the robots? To some degree, yeah, right? We can just take that exhaust from conversational intelligence and all this great information we have access to now that is translated into systems for us on behalf of us. What happens if we give that time back to our sellers and our CSMs and we instead have them focusing less on the clerical work, but rather on the more strategic work? I just think that's such a meaningful shift in how we show up with our customers. Now you have less clerical, more strategic work. You have a co-pilot next to you helping you do the best work of your life. And oh, by the way, you're constantly trained and developed as a human being, as a professional to get better, healthier, and even more effective in how you support your end customer. That feels like a really compelling use case for AI. Listen, 10 years from now, maybe not 10 years, 5 years from now, we may all be replaced by AI bots that do sales from start to finish. So I'm not saying that this is the end all of where we're at today, but I actually think this is probably the most meaningful place right now because it is still human centric and still very connective, which I actually like.
Yeah. We all want AI to do the cleaning and the dishes so that we have time for more art, right? Like
It's
that's
more fun that
that's
way.
the gist of it. I'd also love to hear about mistakes, Karan. What are some of the lessons you've learned the hard way in being in go-to-market strategy and ops? And what advice would you give to listeners to avoid repeating the same mistakes?
I have so many mistakes, Chandrika. I'm going to have to pick between them. I'll pick the most meaningful ones. Look, I say a couple of things probably too frequently, but I do believe in it, right? So, one, most companies suffer more from indigestion than they do starvation. It's a very true statement. It doesn't matter if you're a 10-person startup or a 1,000-person company, I see the same thing, right? I also think that the responsibility of a revenue operations team is what? It's to be the connective tissue and the prioritization engine of a revenue organization. We're one of the only ones that actually looks across a full go to market life cycle, similar to our CRO, right? Early days, I didn't think that way. Early days, my reaction was how much throughput can I get from myself and my teams? And it was a little bit more reactive by nature. And actually, it's easy to do that, Chandrika, because what ends up happening is that the folks that are the loudest are usually the salespeople. And so, what do they love to do? They love to celebrate the person that gave them the shiny purple button as quickly as possible, that put the most sort of widgets in the system or generated the most tickets and closed and just did what they were told. That was me early days. But quickly, I learned that actually the answer for great operators is to properly pressure test, sometimes say no and not now, effectively prioritize the highest leverage initiatives, the ones that have true impact to the business. And sometimes that does not make you particularly popular, right? Because you're not just saying, okay, let me swivel chair and do the work you asked for. Instead, I'm going to push you. And I'm going to say, why do you actually need this thing? Why do you want a new comp plan? You don't need a new comp plan. What is the first principle issue you're solving for? That behavior shift is probably the most meaningful change that I've made over my career. And it's what I love to espouse, teach, and train my teams on is how to think in that motion versus think reactively, which by the way, that's what operators want. And having done that, I think it's helped me get a seat at the table with revenue leaders in a way that I didn't have early in my career. So to answer your question directly, my number one mistake early on was I was solving for the wrong root variable. What I was trying to accomplish as an operator was too tactical, too reactive. And I think making a shift there was probably the most meaningful thing. And then, all the other stuff we talk about around like, hey, how do you build the right sanction source of truth or any of these different topics we covered off? It was with that mindset. How do I build to scale? How do I pressure test the right decisions? How do I not become reactive so I have more time to build, again, the right solution, the right way over the right period of time? All that gets unlocked if you have a mindset shift. And that to me is sort of the crux.
Now, for someone looking to transition into revenue operations or more of a strategic go to market role, you've talked about a bunch of different things that they could do. What can they get started with, like tomorrow? What skills can they start developing right now to set themselves up for success in future?
That's a good question. And by the way, my answer to this has changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of years. So Sapphire Ventures, who look, I'm biased. I was a partner there for a while, so I love those folks. Great VC firm. They recently released an article, and I think it was connected with the folks at Clay. It's a Clay and them partnered on it, where they talked about the rise in revenue operations of the strategic generalist. And I thought that was such a cool idea, which is, well, what does that actually mean? What that means to me is there's this type of operator out there that is, again, inherently strategic by nature, meaning they're looking at the bigger picture. They're actually solving for the right sort of highest leverage items. They know how to prioritize what matters the most. So they're strategic in nature. But then they're a generalist, meaning when you have tools out there that are AI centric and AI forward, it's not so hard anymore to get a ton of to be highly quote unquote technical, right? Like now I can go on Lovable and vibe code myself if I wanted, right? And I'm not technical by nature. It's the same thing with go to market tools. The stuff that was really hard to get access to and to be able to do autonomously, now you can do a lot easier. You can build workflows even if you're not super technical. You can do AI scraping if you're not super technical. You can connect all the different tools we talked about into a singular customer motion and 360 manner in a way that we couldn't before. So inherently you have almost like this generalist element of an operator where they should be able to do all the things with respect to process and technology that they couldn't do 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so to answer your question directly, I think there's two things you can do. So number one, please be super curious as an operator. There's so much great technology out there. Go explore all of it. A lot of them are free to try, by the way. Go and explore it. Go out and talk to your peers about it. Learn about new technologies like yours, Chandrika, and get a little bit deeper there. Be intellectually curious on one end. That's how you become a great generalist. Before that was this 4-letter word. It's not anymore. I think it's a good thing. And then on the other end, continue to think about what it means to be a strategist for the organization. If you want to have a seat at the table, you have to think like you have a seat at the table. So what are the highest leverage items to solve for? If I'm one of the few folks that actually looks across the entire go-to-market engine, how do I think about handoffs and customer journey and the mindset accordingly? So I don't know if there's a perfect answer here as much as saying that like, think about the strategy, think about the generalist, combine the two, make sure you're solving for both. And I think you will be that next generation of operator. What I don't think will be the case in 2, 3, 4 years is you're going to have all these, and we have it at LaunchDarkly today, these like supreme centers of excellence, systems and enablement and technology and deal management. I think a lot of that will start to meld together in some ways. And I think that's a good thing. And you'll have more comprehensive operators. So start working on your career in that manner. And I think good things will happen.
Words of wisdom. You heard it right here, folks, on Hold the Churn. Now, finally, when you think about the future of go-to-market and revenue operations, Karan, over the next few years, what are you most excited about and what keeps you up at night?
I think AI is both ultimately, but let me maybe get more specific because I think it's an interesting one that I was actually talking with my president at LaunchDarkly about just a couple of days ago, funny enough. And we were talking about like where's this go to market world going? And I was like, remember 5 years ago, 7 years ago, nobody really talked about PLG, right? That wasn't a thing. Not really. Maybe a little bit, but not really. Now look at the last 5 IPOs that have come out, right? And you can talk about all of them. You can talk about Figma and there's a bunch, right? They all have a PLG motion. In fact, most of the highest growing companies have a great PLG motion, right? 5 years ago, we weren't thinking that way. 5 to 7 years ago, right? What does this world look like 5 to 7 years from now? Isn't it fair to say that AI is going to be just like everybody who is good and great at go to market will have an exceptional AI layer against their go to market engine? And that could mean everything from the Copilot stuff I was talking about. But isn't it also possible that there's this like completely autopilot motion, maybe a layer above PLG where I could see, going out and outbounding Chandrika and having the prosecution conversations and having a bot with a face that has a objection handling motion to doing autonomous POVs to having a deal desk GPT that actually negotiates the deal all the way to close. Like any and all of that could happen too. I guess to answer your question directly, it's like, what am I excited about? What I'm excited about is like, it's something like what happened with PLG 5 to 7 years ago is going to happen with AI in the next 3 to 5 years, if not faster. And it will completely change the way we think about the composition of a great organization, right? A great go-to-market organization. My curiosity is, who are the operators? Because we really are at the quarterback level with this. Who are the operators that will help bring it into fruition? The reality is that now more than ever, the folks that were, call it building the infrastructure, the plumbing, the back end, the processes, all that in revenue, us operators are more important than ever. we're the ones who will be able to further make scientific what go to market is and do it through AI. I'm excited for that. We're at the tip of the spear. We get to lead the charge on that. And I do wonder what that makes, what go to market looks like in 2, 3, 4 years from now, knowing that that may be where some of the stuff is going and knowing that we're at the helm.
Karan, this has been fantastic. You've given me so much to think about, and I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm sure our listeners have learned a tremendous amount. Is there anything you were hoping to touch on that we haven't gotten to?
No, I mean, look, I love these conversations because I think it elicits thought and it elicits dialogue and discussion. My main takeaway is like, look, I might be 50% wrong about 100% of things. You know what I mean? Like, I might not be I have a strong opinion about where we're going with AI and what I've observed and what's worked for me. Use it as a way to breed discussion amongst us operators, amongst the go-to-market community, and maybe it helps elicit that next layer and change that I think we're all looking for and that will naturally come. So no, I don't think we missed anything. I just get excited when this sort of stuff gets out in the ether, and I'm hopeful that folks are benefiting from it and we all get better together.
Sure. And I'm super excited for this episode to drop and for our listeners to get to hear everything that we've talked about today. Now, where can listeners find you if they want to reach out and talk about some of this stuff more?
Man, I try not to get overexposed, Chandrika, as in like I try not to be everywhere and anywhere, but I can't also help it because I think I have a bit of a teacher's mentality. I like to keep teaching, sharing, and espousing. So look, I'm right. We have Dreamforce around the corner. I'm always at OpStars and Dreamforce, and I'm rolling around there. But certainly you can reach out to me via LinkedIn and get engaged with me there. I try to do these sort of sessions from time to time, these podcasts, but openly. One of my favorite things to do is I have lots of peers that say, hey, can you come into my organization in my all staff meeting or all hands meeting and just come chat with some folks about all things RevOps? Do that all the time. And I find that those more intimate settings are great. So I guess long-winded way to say, just reach out to me. If you want to spend more time with me, you want to hear a little bit of what I'm thinking, I'm happy to chat. And if you want to just debate and discuss with me, I'm happy to do that as well. But I'm around. LinkedIn's easiest. But you'll see me in the streets.
Well, I'll catch you at OpStars or Dreamforce and we'll get together. But for our listeners, find Karan on LinkedIn if you want to get in touch. And yeah, he's excited to help out and share his knowledge in any way.